Thank you, Michael. That was awesome. Hi, everyone. How's it going? I suppose it's really hard to hear you since we're doing webinar here. So let me just set up my screen here and then share my screen. Okay, just quick video check. Can you see my my screen, Michael?
Yes, you can.
Okay, awesome. All right. Thanks for having me today to talk about strategic business analytics. So my name is Julie. I am a program manager at Microsoft. I've been working in the business analytics team for about 3 years, and then a lot of on the data warehouse and BI world a few years before that. And I've started sort of like stop and think, start thinking about in the last few years, 5, 6, 7, 8 years or so, what have I learned and what are the things that I'd like to share with the community? Business analytics is one of the areas that I'm super passionate about. And I thought, I went to the past BA virtual chapters and I saw all the kind of meeting archive, all the meetings that got submitted. And it was really interesting how diverse the kinds of topics that get discussed. And it's super awesome. And there was one area that is a little bit lacking in terms of the BA discussions, in terms of the management side of it, how to create a good or run a good BA team. So I thought there have been a few sort of really good learnings that I have, that I've had from the past few years, and also talking to various folks in the BA space. So I've started sort of collecting all this kind of information together and summarize it here. Now, what I'm about to show you, it's not definitely not the the go-to, the only way of doing things, but I do want to share some of the learnings that I've had. Towards the end, if you would like, if you want to share some of the learnings that you have from your team as well, from your BA team, that would be awesome too. Okay, let me just get started then. Let's see here. Okay, so what is business analytics? So this is a very great question. Depending on who you ask, you'll get different answers. So these are the kinds of answers that I get from people, and granted, the people that I ask come from different sort of background, ranging from fresh grads to seasoned professionals and folks who are coming from the software engineering background all the way to the data professionals background, and it's really interesting. So it got me thinking perhaps it's a good idea to kind of reestablish the base before I continue the discussion on strategic business analytics. So when I look at the Wikipedia definition of business analytics, this is what it says, and I actually pretty much agree with what it says here, particularly in the statement where it says continuous iterative exploration and investigation of past business performance to gain insight and drive business planning. If I can add one more thing, it's probably to do with integrating it as part of the business operations and execution part of the business. So, and then also here it says the next part, business analytics focuses on developing new insights and understanding of business performance based on data and statistical methods. So it sounds like there are two kind of aspects here. One is to do with what is it that we actually do, and then the second part is sort of on the tech side, how do we do it? Now, when you read this at a glance, it sounded like, isn't this just business intelligence? I actually asked the same questions a few years ago. So, and I do agree, this is the continuing statement from Wikipedia where it says BI is a consistent, produces a consistent set of metrics, also uses data and statistical methods. So check out the past BA virtual chapter meeting archive, and you get to see some of the overlaps when you see the past BA virtual chapters and the BI virtual chapters. The meetings or the topics can overlap, and it is actually reality, and it's actually true. There are some overlaps. So let's talk more about the reality of BA. When when you ask folks, when you form a team, and this has happened to me before, where, when we talk about business analytics, a lot of folks, especially from the technical background, focus on the analytics part and maybe not so much on the business part. Um, the other the other aspect that I also hear is that, folks, especially data science, is one of the, sexiest job, I suppose, in the current, probably the past few years or so. A lot of folks want to jump into data science, and that's actually awesome. And the good news is BA uses data science, and both really require data. So if you want to jump into data science and you want to create great models, do feature building, do like feature model, do modeling, data modeling, ML models, and you don't have data, guess what? You couldn't do it. And the same thing with business analytics. It's not quite BI. So business analytics is not quite BI. Well, actually, it is part of BI is actually part of business analytics, but quite often the questions or goals can be served with BI. And that was my aha moment from a few years ago. And the other side of this, which is the not so technical side of it that doesn't get discussed often, is the culture, the data-driven, the organizational side of the business analytics. Without this component, it's really hard to thrive in the business analytics process or goals. So if you don't have the mentality of learn, apply, learn, that feedback loop, it's going to be really hard to drive business analytics. And there's also a catch-22 as well in terms of establishing data culture or data-driven culture. I think this term has been discussed a few times before, and in fact, it's actually pretty prominent in some of the well-known websites out there, like HBR, like Harvard Business Review. So it's a very important aspect of business analytics. And the other thing is, whoever consumes the business analytics output or the analytics output, they need to be an integral part of the business analytics. They need to have some kind of ownership, skin in the game, so to speak, before we can be successful. And sometimes part of the journey is actually, building that muscle and how, in terms of how to engage the consumers more. So if you're thinking, hey, I've done this analysis, whatever that might be, 5.7% growth year over year, and then you toss it over and then expect the consumers to somehow just consume it, it's not gonna happen. That's not how it works. So it sort of so with all these learnings, I came to a conclusion where the best approach in my mind, or the ones that I've seen that works quite well, is when we look at business analytics as a service. So think about how you have electricity or water in your house, how it's actually run as essentially as a service, and it has the product outcome as well, but it's run as a service. It has things like, you want to make sure that it's available, and if something goes wrong, someone to contact, and if you have bad experience, someone who you can contact, and so on. It is a service and it requires iteration over time. It's not something that you build once and then that's it, and deploy it, you forget about it. That's not how BA works. It's a very different kind of from back from the days of old software engineering world. Now, when we pause and think about business analytics as a service, it requires us to think deeply more into different aspects of business analytics or different aspects of a service. So imagine if you're selling something, what is it that you want to sell? Who do you serve? Who do you sell it to? And if you're selling this business analytics, if you're creating a team to do business analytics, what is your value proposition? What are the customers' pain points today? How do you think that you can solve this? How do you create opportunities around this? And then how do you position the data culture in the ecosystem, in the actual organization that you're trying to do business analytics for? And what's your management leadership strategy? what's your engineering strategy and operational strategy? All these three items, the last three, are very important to get things right, but you kind of have to learn and iterate over time as well to be able to serve your customers, to be able to serve the value proposition that we proposed earlier, and then driving the data culture. And with all of this, because we're thinking about a service business, that business analytics as a service, you'll have to think about as well, how do you maximize the value and minimize the cost? If you think that you have unlimited budget, guess what, you're wrong. Something has to cost, something will cost something to somebody. So just keep in mind that you'll have to think about cost as well. Now, another question that I usually get asked is whenever going into a team or teams or clients or customers that want to build business analytics, I get asked this quite frequently as well. Should we build BI capability first? So business intelligence capability, things like data warehouse or business intelligence, like all lab cube and all that. So this question comes up, especially when I talk to another data professional, and rightly so. It's a fair question. Now, if you're a leader in the business analytics team, then you probably want to rephrase the question, what is it that you're trying to solve? Maybe you should build BI capability first, but maybe you should pause and think about what are the problems that you're trying to solve, and how do we solve this together from the management perspective, engineering, as well as operational. Because remember that BI relies on good data. BI also relies on good data. So both BA and BI relies on good data. If you're thinking about analytics from just the BI perspective, I think it's insufficient. But if you're also looking at it from just the data science perspective, in general, it's also insufficient. Even though you can run and start with it at the beginning and can start pretty fast on the data science side of it, when you have to scale, more often than not, the things that you do as an output of business intelligence would likely have to happen to allow you to scale. So we'll talk more about the how on that part. So when we rethink about the BA as a service, I want to talk about the what as well as the how, because quite often when we talk, we're probably most of you here are in the tech industry. Actually, Michael, would you mind posting the poll? I'm not sure whether it was sent yet. So I'm gonna let the poll run in the background while I talk about the what, because I'd like to see what the outcome is. So Michael, what I'm gonna do is I'll just go through the slides, and then probably in about 2-3 minutes, maybe, or maybe 5 minutes even, we can close all the 3 questions.
I don't think it works while the poll's actually up.
Yeah.
I don't think you can see the slides. But I've never actually, I don't get to see it from from the audience participation view, so I'm not actually sure what happens.
No worries.
So we've got the one, we got about 70% feedback. We'll close it at about 75% feedback.
Yeah, sounds good.
I'll launch the next one.
Yeah, just let me know when the poll roughly has enough details, and then I'll pause on my presentation. Okay. Right. Oh, I'll check back.
There's that one. Launch the next one.
Okay. Okay, I'm just gonna go through while Michael posts the poll. So if you can take a moment and take a look at the questions, then we'll review it after. So earlier I talked about, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say people are submitting a lot faster on the second form.
Okay, yeah, I think the second and third questions are probably pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit on the customer sponsors and partners. So these are the entities, I suppose, that you're going to be engaging with, like the BA team have to be engaging with. So the question is like, do you know who your customers are? And and what is it that your customer's trying to sell. So customers here is sort of like the consumers of your BA output. So imagine you're working for, I don't know, maybe some company like Nike. So they sell shoes, they sell athletic products. So if you're a business analytics team for Nike, then who would be consuming your data or your insights, your output? What is it that they say? An example would be the product development team. The product development team is your consumer. Then they would ask you questions related to the things that they're selling. So it might be, they might be coming from the shoe department. So they can ask questions like, I want to know how well the Jordan line versus the normal regular line. And should we market it in certain ways? Should we talk about it during the, I don't know, maybe the NBA seasons or something along those lines? Now, the good question and ask them is whenever they have a question, how do they answer those questions today? And then another sort of good tip here is that if they can answer the question, so say ask them if the output is low or high, what are they going to do with it? Because sometimes it's a good idea to ask them questions related to if we know the answer A, B, or C, what would you do with each of the the options? When we talk about the use cases from these customers or the consumers of BA, essentially there are three categories. One is they want to use this data for long-term strategic decisions. Sometimes it's for short-term tactical stuff. Sometimes it's for operational tracking. And then it's also good to know who are the sponsors for your BA team. So sometimes it can be coming from your VP. Sometimes it could be coming from your CEO or the finance team. Sometimes it comes from just the IT department itself. And I think some of the challenges with having the sponsorship coming from IT department is that it might be a pure IT-oriented quest. While in itself, as long as you agree the goal overall, that everybody agrees, including the customers, consumers, and then the partners that you're going to be working with, as long as you agree with the goal, then that's fine. But if you're doing business analytics, so meaning the output is for business, and then the sponsor is just coming from the IT department, it usually becomes really tricky. At least that's what I've seen in the past few years. Now, when you get money or budget from the sponsors, what value do you give back to the sponsors? And you need to understand the charters and why, because as I said, nothing comes free. Everything will cost something to somebody. How do you give the value back to the sponsors? And lastly, quite often, when you do or execute business analytics, you more often than not will partner with somebody. It could be to do with maybe your partner is supplying the data for you, or it could be that your partners help you to scale a little bit more or to scale the output of your insights more into the different channels. So I'd like to walk through these insights consumer types because these are a few things that this is one of the things that might get overlooked as well. So in the past few years that I've been working in the business analytics or BI sort of world, more often than not, my direct consumer would be the business or data analyst, and they're your champion. So if you're coming from the data engineering background or the data science background, please leverage your business and data analysts really well because they're your first line, usually your first line before the end and consumer of your BA output. So essentially, if you're looking at it as if this is like business analytics as a business or as a service, they're essentially your evangelists. They're your raving fans. They're your sales executive. They're the ones that try to sell your output, your business analytics output, to the end business. So for example, to the CFO or to the product development team or others. And then you have the consumer, the different type of consumer where they are kind of the business, service, or product owners. Remember I talked about the Nike product line. So, for example, the shoes product, they usually, are interested in understanding, what's the growth, what does it look like, if they do a certain campaigns. Most of the time they're using this data or these insights to understand why and adapt or change their business planning so that they can sell more, as an example. And then sometimes you also have the third type of customer, who is the leadership. So usually this is like the high level, like CEO, CFO. They want to know how the portfolio of the organization is functioning. So the portfolio of the product. So your shoes, your t-shirts, your hats. How are they? How do they sell? Which ones sell more? Which one generates more revenue? Which ones have more customers? Is there anything that we can do to tap into a new market or maybe grow the existing market? It really depends on the organization strategy. So quite often or not, this sort of leadership team usually partner up with different partners. So for example, Nike might be partnering up with other stores that sell other Nike products. And then, you have sales, marketing, suppliers, and more. The leadership usually have this kind of in-depth, well, not quite in-depth, but more like broad engagement with other parts of the business. All right, so I'm just gonna pause for a little bit. Can we share the poll, Michael? Let's see if I could see it as well here.
Okay. If you want to see it, you should be able to just on the go to webinar, the sharing panel, it should show you what the audience view looks like.
Let's see, I don't think I'm seeing it.
Right. Well, shall I read it to you?
Ooh. Interesting. I'm not able to see the.
You actually can't see it. Yeah, that's a bit of a fail on the
No worries.
on the tooling side. It's kind of bizarre, right? Okay, so I'll read them out to you. Essentially, there are 18% who are involved in management. 56% of people say they are in data engineering, data science, or data architect. 28% say they're in infrastructure or systems or database administration. 42% say they are business or data analytics and report curation. 5% say other.
Cool. All right. And then the next question.
On the next poll, in the last month, have you been working on a business analytics project? 62% say yes, 38% say no. And then in our final poll, where we said in the last month, for your current project, are you using the following? Cloud, 13%, on-premises, 47%, and a hybrid is 40%.
Okay, awesome. That's actually really good to know. Thanks for sharing your
However
background.
badly we did it, yeah.
All right, so I assume you can see my screen now?
Yes.
Yeah,
we can
okay,
see
great. All right, so one of the reasons why I ask some of these questions is because I want to also understand where you're coming from in terms of where you're coming into business analytics and trying to get a gauge of why. It is pretty tricky to do it in webinars, so that's why I asked from the poll. It gives me understanding a bit more about your background, so that's great. All right, so I want to go back to, so earlier we were talking about the consumer types, and then now I'm going to talk about the value. So whether or not you're a data engineer, data scientist, analyst, or management, this is something that if you're in the BA team, or if you're in even like infra team in the infra area, so infra, data science, data analysts, managers, all of you, if you're in the BA team, you'll need to understand what is the value and agree on that. Sometimes the value from business analytics perspective, perhaps you're happy with just self-serving the data. technically speaking, that's probably the most basic thing that you do, but that could be one of your offerings. The second one is self-service BI or reporting. So this is, I think, a lot of folks who actually are in the past group or past members, you're probably more familiar with this, like the business intelligence and reporting, because it's pretty common these days. Now the last part is where you can use some BI, but if you want to get more advanced, this is where you use data science to help influence planning, execution, and measurement. Technically speaking, BI also does that too, but there are certain things that data science could do that BI cannot do today. And when you do the execution of, providing insights to influence planning, execution, and measurement, when you want to, especially when you're forming a data science project, it's usually more project-based rather than, hey, let's get everything and then let's show everything to everybody. No, usually when it's insights focused, it's very much project focused. It has a certain objectives and it has certain kind of assessment, methodology review, and so on, and deep engagement with the customers. So I quite like the third one here. That's where you actually really get deep into the kind of BA process. Now, a few things, or actually a couple more important things that you'll need to think about in terms of value is trust and value to the customers. If you keep continuously providing not so accurate data to customers, you're going to lose them. If your projects are going to be blocked a lot and you cannot come to resolution, or you don't have a good project ownership from your BA team as well as the customers who are going to use the output to drive their business, you're likely going to fail as well. So even though you're really in the tech sort of world, creating a Spark job or creating SSIS ETL package, creating R script, Python, AI models in Python, just, really every now and then just pause. What value are you bringing to the customers? And then are you delivering trust and value to the customers? How do you maintain that? Because once you lose it, it's really hard to gain it back. And then the last one here is, as part of providing, like, say, for example, the self-service data or insights or the self-service reporting, are you also growing the data culture or the data-driven culture in your organization? Interestingly enough, in most cases, whenever I see analytics or BI sort of work, it is a step forward into the improving the data culture. And quite often, it's great that folks, have started. It's harder to get it into the next level of really good data-driven culture or data culture. So what I mean by that is okay, there you go. So what we mean by data culture is, now when, so think about the actual business, they're selling something. Now, can they measure whatever they're doing? Are they measuring the objectives? Are they analyzing the data once they've measured it? Are they influencing the planning on the things that they've measured and analyzed? And then do they execute sort of somewhat similar to what they've planned to do? So it is a continuous circle, and it has to start somewhere. And the interestingly enough is like this sort of cycle can go like small and it can go really big. So it can apply to the whole organization, or it could apply to a specific department in terms of, execute, measure, analyze, plan, execute, measure, analyze, plan. So like that circle can apply broadly or in the specific department. And then another thing is, because you're in the BA team, it is quite important for you to be the advocate or the champion of the data culture. How do you educate customers along with you about the things that you want to deliver as part of BA team? So it could be data culture as your main goal, and it could also be just the insights, keep producing the insights. Whatever that might be, keep continuing, evangelizing, championing the values of your BA team to your customers so that they can be better partners for you as well, better integral part of the BA team. Now, I had a look earlier this morning, it's actually morning my time right now. Earlier this morning, I was thinking like, what are the data-driven challenges? So I reviewed this. I actually found a fairly good article from HBR. Some of the data-driven challenges that we see today, now number one is organizational silos. And take a look at this, silos. So in the tech as well as in the organization. So it's quite prominent. And I'm sure at least one of these, if you're in the BA team, will be applicable to you. And the key is to think about how do we break some of these barriers? How do we continue moving forward? Things like, especially if you're coming from the tech background, if you have data consistency issues, how do you break it? Either using technology or maybe it's actually more organizational sort of challenge. How do you break that? So have a think about this, and do read the link. I will share the slide deck with Michael so that you can review it later. But do read this document, especially if you're really into driving changes in your organization to be more data driven. Now, this pyramid, I kind of constructed it myself based on my understanding, but I think based on my understanding and based on discussions with a few folks out there who actually do business analytics, this is also going back to should we build BI capability first, or should we just, do advanced analytics like the data science bit? So here's what happens in the data world. Firstly, one way or another, there should be a data generator. So if you don't have something or somebody that supplies data, then you cannot do any analytics. So that's plain and simple. Some of these things, if you're coming from the infra or DBA side of the world, this could be as simple as like event logs or some kind of logs. Maybe some of these things can be useful for the business. You don't know, but there is some kind of data generators, and it could be applications as well that generates data. And then in most cases, the data that is supplied by other folks, whether it's internal within the organization or external, in most cases, they are in the shape that you probably cannot use almost immediately, especially if you want to join it with other data sets from other data sources or from your own data source. And this is the step where you have to do. You have to curate the data so that it makes sense. Sometimes it has to make sense from your team first, because this is the key to kind of scaling. And more often than not, you also want to think about if you are able to do self-service, especially thinking about scaling out. If you want to do self-service data, how can you curate it in such a way that other folks can understand the meaning and the intent of the data, what it represents? And there's actually a research here. Less than 50% of structured data today is being used in decision making. And then less than 1% of unstructured data is analyzed or used at all. So have a think about that. Like, how do you, in your organization, if you really want to drive business analytics, how do you use more of your structured and unstructured data? The next step is, this is probably most folks will be familiar with, especially if you're a regular BA or BI virtual chapter attendees. You probably know this. The next capability is you want to be able to understand what happened, why did it happen, what is going to happen next, and then what should we be doing next. So this is essentially how I think of it. In some cases, you can do diagnostic, and as long as you can get the data, the relevant data and you can do descriptive. But it's going to be hard if you want to just focus on, say, just the predictive side of it, and then you don't have any of the layers underneath. It's just impossible. You cannot do predictive if you cannot have the data. You cannot do predictive if you don't understand the intent and the meaning of the data. You cannot do predictive if you cannot even describe what happened. So just kind of kind of reminder of those who actually have been in the BI for so long or in the data science for so long. This is probably a good reminder for you, or even for someone who's new to the BA world. And these are more surveys coming from HBR. Now think about this data and analytics maturity. Only 32% have standardized reporting and analysis, and even being able to do the backward-looking stuff. Then so it gets, as you go down the rows here or the line items, you get more and more into the mature sort of analytics. And then this from descriptive to prescriptive, on the right-hand side here, you'll get to see how organizations actually adopt the descriptive analysis as an example, all the way to prescriptive and what they want to do. So there's definitely a stronger desire to do more prescriptive, to do more advanced analytics. But again, because of the layer that I showed you earlier, if you want to really seriously scale out and do this really, really good, then your data, your curated data, have to be somewhat in a reasonable format. Again, the key is to scale. If you want to just do one-off, kind of like startup ad hoc mentality, then maybe you can do just one at a time. But eventually, you'll have to do organize your data in a more curated way, in a more understandable way for others to use, to be able to use. Oh, that was a extra slide there. So these are the typical BA questions. If you're specifically trying to get into BA and wanted to know, so I've heard all the buzz about business analytics or advanced analytics, but what is it really that we produce in terms of metrics? These are some examples of the BA questions. Things like revenue, cost of goods sold, orders, customer engagement, lifetime value, product metabolism. So product metabolism is actually quite interesting, especially if you're in a business of producing outputs fairly frequently. How often, especially if you're in the software engineering world like Microsoft, product metabolism is actually quite important too. Customer satisfaction gets overlooked sometimes. Support metrics gets overlooked sometimes too. Now, when I brain dump all these kind of BA questions, think about the variety of the questions and how most of them usually have one goal, which is to do with how do we run the business better. And some of these BA questions you can answer from the BI kind of reporting. But the next step, like the why and how to improve and what other things you can do beyond using the past data to uncover kind of like new market and all that kind of stuff, that usually requires a bit more data science, research, and so on, which I'll talk more later in terms of what that means. Okay, let's take a look at some examples. This is probably the only demo that I have. So if you want to get inspirations in terms of, creating good dashboard or creating interesting business analytics sort of report, how you can improve the business and so on, go to the Power BI data stories gallery. You get to see a few examples. So this is one of them. So in the BI world, this is what you probably would produce. But in the business analytics world, you would use this to ask the next step of the next questions. So for example, using this kind of average profits, then the next question is, should we target the lower mid-top regions? What are the characteristics of the lower mid-top regions that can help you to sell more? So it could be that for the top regions, they have a lot more sort of like customers that have more income, more dispensable income than the lower regions. So what is your target then? And then so let's go to the executive dashboard. So if your customer or your producer of the if you're producing data or insights for executives, this is the kind of sort of information that you're going to provide. Again, executives are going to ask, what else can we do to make it better? So, and that's where the data science plays. Okay. So BA as a team sport. So this is quite interesting because when I was looking at how how a team sport work. It is a really large orchestrated way of, getting a lot of people from different background, different positions to make the game work and to win the game. And then some of the facets here actually quite important for the business analytics as well. So understanding the game, the play, who the players are, the framework, and the rules. So remember, whenever you apply this, when you think about these facets, and I'll go through in deeper momentarily, you'll also have to think about how does it apply to business analytics as a service, like I mentioned before, from the customer, value proposition, all the way to the data culture. Now, the game, if you think about business analytics as a game, is this. You'll want to be able to execute, measure, analyze, and plan. That's your game. So if you think that the game is to do with, I want to write the nicest, neatest Databricks job or SSIS job or the prettiest Power BI job, then that is not the game. The game is very different. The game is about business, how to drive the business better. And then you also have to think about how you can engage with the customers, the value proposition, how do you drive data culture, how do you maximize value for your consumers, so your customers, sponsors, and partners, and minimize the cost. So that's the game. And then the play is you want to be able to do this well, this pyramid that I talked about earlier. Now, to start with, if especially sort of applying it to, most of you probably know some of these words, like the terms like big data, data warehouse, BI, and data science. This is how you look into it. This provides you a bit of a frame into how the analytics pyramid applies to you individually, depending on your roles. Now, remember about the execute, measure, plan, and analyze earlier. When you get started, you want to start really fast and be super agile. So sometimes you have to do that stack of the pyramids very frequently and very, very fast. But eventually, if you want to do the scaling more, you have to consolidate. And you consolidate a few things at a time, especially on the curated data earlier. And then you want to make it a little bit bigger and larger to scale even more. To give you an example, you can do a data science project with just the one data source, and you don't have to kind of make sense too much of the curated data for other people, but only for you and for your data science team, and it might work well just for that one project. But if you're going to reuse that data often and regular and scale it out to other people, you'll have to make sure that it's actually makes sense for other folks. And this is where the concept of data warehouse comes in play. The concept of the BI side of things comes in play as well. Now, these are some of the players. Make sure that you utilize them well. So the customers, they really need to own the business process. If they don't have the ownership of improving their own business and you're trying to sell this, biggest better metrics related to year-over-year growth or customer segments and all that kind of stuff. But if the customers don't have the desire to improve their business process and utilizing data to do this, and with obviously other qualitative data, then it's going to be pretty tricky. And partners, I mentioned earlier about data suppliers of the BA. Data for the BA outcome, and you also have data architects, data engineers. Some of these on the poll, you actually identified yourself as one of these. And lastly, the optional specialist. So sometimes your BI folks could include the OLAP and Cube. So the question that I also get asked is, should we build a Cube for our BA team? Well, it really depends what we're trying to do. And more often than not, after you create a lot of Power BI, and Power BI is super awesome with helping you to prototype fast and show value really fast. But more often than not, when you actually have more and more data, chances are somehow you'll probably need to go and look into how do we make your Power BI to perform better. And sometimes the answer is maybe building a cube or maybe using Power BI Premium Service and so on. And then sometimes when you want to identify a new market, this is where you get the specialists like economist or market research, finance analyst, user research, and so on. And you want to be able to leverage them as well as part of your BA team. Now, this is the framework of the team sport or the game. You will need to have infra. Yes, and you'll need to have architecture, sort of design. You need to have someone to help you administrate. You'll need to have someone to operationalize it. If you think about the data science project, it's all well and good if you only have to do one-off, but more often than not, these have to be productionized, have to be operationalized. What does that mean? Does your infra support it? Does your choice of technology support it? Do you have SLA? How do you maintain it? Do you have that kind of agreement with others? And then there's the data engineering and data science aspect of engineering. So you want to make sure that they are well nurtured. That all these aspects need to be well nurtured. So in the initial phase, if you're in the engineering sort of spot, so any of these 5 items here, or in any of the 5 engineering sort of framework, you want to think about how do you make sure that your platform, everything along those 5 aspects can allow you to be agile. And then when you're in the growth phase, you have to think not just the agility, but scalability as well as sustainability. And what makes it's easy to start sometimes, but it's really hard to make it sustainable. And the key to make it sustainable, at least from my experience, is if you can deliver the minimum viable product or the minimum output every single time and iterate, get feedback and iterate, that's what helps you to be better in the BA world. Now, these are some of the data engineering aspects that get overlooked. Data quality, data modeling. So if you're coming from, pure software engineering background, these are the things that, especially if you're hiring someone new to your BA team, these are some of the things that they might not know that you want to educate and nurture them because it's very important. Things like data governance, data engineering guidelines, should everybody have their own technique or methods to onboard data? Maybe, maybe not. I would like to think that when you have to scale, you probably have to, really think about the strategy on that. Now, if you're new to data science or if you're in the data science world, this is the TDSP, Team Data Science Process Lifecycle. It's, again, you can run this just data science on its own purely without, thinking about the business analytics as a service as an example earlier. But if you're really serving the business and you want to scale, you'll have to think about back to the pyramid. Like, how do you go all the way from business understanding to creating a model that get operationalized? So sometimes the data science lifecycle involves business understanding, data acquisition and understanding, so you understand what's going on. And then you have to, provide or show the project assessment to your customers. And sometimes it has to stop there because there is nothing you can do. There's no additional insights that you can bring to improve the business. Sometimes it goes like that because maybe the data is not sufficient, or maybe the assumption was maybe there was too much unfounded assumption that you need to get more data or other things. So don't get disheartened if you don't get to the modeling phase. Sometimes it happens. But save those projects to later because somehow I've seen this before many times where you park the project and then somehow you get more and more data and you can restart the project again. Now, the rules. So if you were kind of like playing football, usually there's a rule related to where to place people, the positions, how to start the game, how to continue the game, etc. It's similar to business analytics. You need to understand the structure of the game, like the playing field. What the data domain are we playing with? Retail is different from subscription-based sort of business. If you're working in the operation, it's going to be really different as well. Do you need some kind of real-time or not so real-time data? So this is where you're doing the big data analytics. This becomes important. Rules for the scoring points, like how do you win a customer? How do you make them happy? So is it to be able to answer questions? Is it, or is it something else? How much can you engage with the customers as well? Now, rules for starting and executing the play. So this is actually really, really important, especially if you are doing this for the whole organization. You have to think about compliance, regulations, privacy, ethics, and how the expectation and execution of the responsibility and accountability from the different players. So this is probably going to be the last two of my slides, and I think we have 5 minutes left, which might allow us to get some questions answered. So this is BI as a service. You need to know the game and how to play as a team. So remember, the game is about this, trying to improve the business, and how do you execute it? And how do you go through this, analytics pyramid every single time and make it faster or better or scalable? And then always go back to the fundamental sort of aspects of BA as a service, your customers, your value proposition, how do you think about data culture, how do you think about cost? All of this need also to be backed by great management and leadership strategy, engineering strategy, and operational strategy. So those who are in the management or leadership team, please do sort of think about these three items below, because it becomes when you have strong strategy, usually you can execute pretty well. When you don't have any strategy, that's when the BA projects tank. Some closing thoughts. Some of you may have seen this before, and this is one of the reasons why I asked, like, how many of you are using or executing BA projects using cloud or on-prem or hybrid. So we do have modern data warehouse on Azure. So this is some of the things that you can use in terms of technology. But as I said, BA is not just technology, it's the whole thing. It's like end-to-end, how do you drive value that help the customers to gain more insights about how the business is doing and how they can do better in terms of their business. And also there's Power BI, so don't forget about that. That's I've used Power BI so often in terms of prototyping analytics today, up to until today. Well, and hopefully more. I think this is, useful resources for inspiration. HBR actually have got quite a lot of surveys or discussions related to analytics and data-driven culture. So I do encourage you to read them. And I think this is my last slide. I'm just gonna pause here in case people want to take a look or copy the URLs. Do we have questions for the last 3 minutes?
Yeah, okay, we've got a couple of it. Jason wanted to know, is there any chance that you can show the slide on what data engineers may be missing? He said it might have been the fourth last slide. Probably about 7 slides back
there. The data engineer, sorry, what was that again?
We said, again, on what data engineers may be missing.
Missing.
Which I think this, Jason, is this, is that the slide you wanted to see?
Yeah, this is the ones that are often overlooked. Most folks think about, scheduling a job, do HD Insight or whatever Spark jobs that they need, or do SSIS jobs, etc. But there are a few aspects when you make that kind of decisions that you need to take into account.
Cool. Rahul just wanted to know if you'd make the slide decks available. If you send me a PDF, I'll include those in the email that goes out tomorrow.
Yep, will do.
So we'll cover that. And then also, so how do you go about building the skills required in these teams? Obviously, I guess a lot of us come from those BI, that BI teams. How do we sort of upskill to be data analysts?
Data analyst. Oh, that's interesting because most of the time I get the data science questions.
I guess the data analyst is
yeah. So, with data analyst, it really depends on where you are at. So let me just kind of scroll through here. So when I first started sort of thinking in the business analytics team perspective, I was really good in the DW or data warehouse BI side of things. And most of the time when I was a consultant, my business or my clients actually know what they want and how they're going to use it. And so that makes my job as a consultant easier. And they're actually the analyst. So when I transitioned from consulting to a full-time in the BA space, I had to do quite a bit of reading in terms of how do people measure their business? I in fact go to product management sort of blogs like Mind the Product, if I remember correctly, and there are a few others, to really think and try to really think, if you're a business owner or product owner, how do you think about running your business well? So that's one of the things that I had to do, like switching from just pure technical to more in the business analyst sort of perspective.
Great. Okay, and final question. Jennifer would like to know is, does team size matter? Small organizations often struggle with resourcing and several roles are often shared by the same individual. Is there an ideal team sort of proportion?
Good question. So it really is hard to gauge like what's good. What I have done before, especially for smaller clients, this is before when I was a consultant. Usually there's like at least 2 business analysts, and then there will be infra is being shared by other folks, and then I come in as the kind of the data engineer essentially. So if it's small enough, you can have one data engineer, it might work, but more often than not, you'll have to have like a couple. But as long as your infra team is supporting you, the infra operationalization kind of supporting you. Generally speaking, you would need to have folks that handle these roles. So it's not so much the titles, but it's more on the functionality, like who can do some of these things because they need to be addressed. So if you look at data architects, data engineers, system architects, data scientists, business data analysts, and then the directors, so essentially the managers, you'll need to have at least kind of 6 people if you're trying to assign like one each. But I doubt that that is the case. Sometimes the engineers are the architects as well. But data engineers are quite big, so you will need to have more than one person. Unless you can do everything on Power BI, maybe you'll have less.
All right. Okay. Thanks a lot, Julie. That was fantastic. And thank you everyone for joining us. Again, we'll send the slides, and this video will be made available for you guys. And we hope you enjoy the rest of your day. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. All right. See you. Bye.